What folklore creature do you think really exists? Anything from the sea really sounds plausible to me considering how little we have explored it. Sea serpents and the kraken are major examples of something that could realistically be hiding in the depths and only come up to the surface on rare occasions. It's not that I inherently believe there is scientific evidence corroborating its existence, but I just really want Mothmen to exist. While I don't believe that they actually exist, the way that Native American refused to ever talk about Wendigo/skinwalkers always seemed interesting to me. Perhaps the original tribes has some loonies among them, and therefore was deemed as supernatural, or it simply served as a way to keep children away from the woods. Who knows? Nicolas Cage. Some say it's all movie magic, but I believe he's real. Some form of Yeti or Sasquatch, aka Bigfoot, most likely did exist at one point in time. It doesn't seem entirely unreasonable to me, albeit the real thing was probably less exciting. Do aliens count? I guess aliens. I don't think there's a chance in hell that they've visited Earth or abducted people, but somewhere out there, yeah, I definitely think so. The universe is so mind-bogglingly massive that the odds of us being the only life in the universe are basically nil. Unicorns. The earliest written accounts of unicorns describe them more akin to deer in looks. There's also an abnormality they can have with their antlers, where they curl together into what looks like a single pointed horn instead of two twisting antlers. It makes sense that they could be changed into myth. Also, there's a real species of flying dragon. Okay, so gliding dragon is a better description, and it doesn't breathe fire. It's native to Indonesia. Trolls are real, and they steal your undies. Not that I think it's likely, but I love the Mokelmbembe legend. Supposedly some sort of dinosaur-like creature living in the swamps in Cameroon or thereabouts. Its name means the one who stops the flow of rivers. Legend has it that this enormous beast has a long neck and is bigger than an elephant. It supposedly walks along the rivers and swamplands most submerged, and has been thought to kill large predators like crocodiles, but then not eat them. There is a story about a small village that killed one of these creatures and ate it, and a short time later, everyone who had eaten its flesh became sick or died. The main reason it's so compelling is that the jungle and swamplands where it supposedly lives are so dense and impassable for people that it could have conceivably lived in the relatively unchanged climate for thousands upon thousands of years, and humans would have never encountered it, or even been able to venture into its habitat with any reasonable effort. Mokelmbembe, rather uncount, but it's supposed to be a pygmy brachiosaurus group that survived the extinction. It's possible because it supposedly lives in dense equatorial rainforests in Africa, where humans are incapable of trespassing. Locals have seen it until recently, and because smaller animals tend to survive mass extinctions, like how mammals survived Cretaceous extinction and pygmy mammoths survived longer than their normal-sized counterparts. The Jersey Devil. I've dated it. Norway has just been a non-stop factory of folklore creatures since the Viking Age to 1900. There's so much to go on that some of those figs would have to be real. The Bunipe is almost certainly an evolution of a real, possibly late Ice Age, creature that was recorded in Aboriginal oral history. Probably the oral history of it was preserved even after the animal went extinct, so that it was later misinterpreted to still exist, and eventually shifted into the realm of folklore. Dragons. Whether or not you believe the Bible, you can still believe its old and Scottish tales both describe flying fire-breathing beasts. The Loch Ness Monster, or more specifically, a creature like it. Maybe there's not a giant beast in that lake, but I think it's totally possible that there's a giant water creature from prehistoric times still roaming the seas. It's so rare and elusive that we haven't seen it. I'm not a fanatic, but I'm open to the idea that Bigfoot/Yeti/Wachamacallid is real but super rare. There's a local legend in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which involves a mysterious and supposedly deadly sort of otherworldly creature. Some versions claim that it's a man-like shapeshifter, capable of blending in with the shadows as it stalks through the desert. Others describe the beast as being curiously canine in nature, albeit with two long limbs, black claws, and eyes that seem to burn like pinprick embers in the darkness. One thing that remains the same through every retelling, though, is the high and eerie keening noise it's said to make when it hunts down its prey. One evening when I was about 11 years old, I heard it. I had been lying in bed, reading beneath my covers with a flashlight, when a mournful howl pierced the air from somewhere across the moonlit sands. My first thought was that it had been a coyote, but as the sound echoed through the night for a second time, I felt a shiver of panic flash up my spine and a deep weight of dread coalesce in my chest. That evil wail was not the call of anything I had ever encountered, nor of something that should have even existed in the waking world. It was the cry of a nightmare incarnate, and no amount of reason or rationality could shake me of that notion. Now, at around the same time as this story, I'd been doing my best to foster a reputation for being an independent and unflappable badass. That goal went swiftly out the window as the screeches seemed to draw ever closer, and I quickly ran from my room to seek the protection of my parents. Upon reaching their door, though, I was presented with an even more terrifying discovery. The howls were coming from inside the house, along with a lot of heavy breathing and the occasional whisper. I couldn't look my mother in the eye for a week. TL. Doctor, freaking skinwalkers. A lot of folklore creatures are just regular creatures in disguise, that is. Giant squid equals kraken. Manatees mistaken for merpeople. Dinosaur bones thought to be dragons, etc. Vampires/werewolves, based on real medical conditions or historical figures. That said, I have no doubt that giant sea creatures of any kind could exist in the depths of the ocean. I can't speak seriously for any other commonly known cryptid or mythic creature, but people seriously underestimate how much land is unsettled, unexplored, or virtually unknown to us as well. There are plenty of places for some other previously undiscovered species to be hidden away, even if only in small numbers. That might not count as a folklore creature for the purposes of this question, but it's worth keeping in mind. On a more I don't hardcore believe it, but I want it to be true sort of level, ghosts and elves/fairies. I feel like both suggest the existence of other realms, if that's the right word to describe it, and would greatly shake up the way we as a society view our world today. Folklore. It is claimed, possibly by the Knives, it is rumored, in an attempt to start a war between the clans of Fork and Spoon, that there exists a monstrous betrayal of the purity of the fork, in which the fork is nothing more than a spoon with some spikes at the end. They say it is called a spork. Now, I know, a spork. What am I? A little teaspoon heathen? But my dear fork friends, I swear, I have seen it, and it has haunted me ever since. The spork exists. I wish I could find proof of or personally experience a ghost. It would be some kind of proof of the afterlife, which would be neat. I don't think it's necessarily likely per se, but my family are Irish, and they hardcore believe in the fair folk, or the AOSC. They're not exactly fairies. They're different, meaner. You don't frig with them, basically, and if something's going horribly wrong in your life, it's probably because you fricked with them, or you made them angry, and you have to be careful how you talk about them. To kind of like with skinwalkers, you don't name them, you just call them the fair folk, or the folk. They mostly hang out and try to get you to owe them a favor. You don't take anything from the folk, or you owe them one, and you don't want to be in that position. There's lots of different types that do lots of different things, though. I don't wanna come off as that weirdo who believes in what is essentially fairies, but I grew up with the stories and I have a healthy level of skepticism about this. I'm not saying they're real, but I'm also not about to step into a fairy circle anytime soon, especially not at dusk. Chupacabra. Errorless. Mythological dog angels from Armenian culture, with the widespread stories of dogs saving people's lives, providing companionship, and giving their very lives for people. I can only believe that the Armenian tales recount tales of dogs in prehistory, before we could understand the depth of their emotion and mental lives fully. Gnomes. Not folklore, but the Tasmanian tiger could still exist. I can't say it, or talk about it, because it will come. That's how you call it. I swear. It does exist. I'm a native. I'm not Navajo. It's not a skinwalker or Windigo. The stories about calling skinwalkers and Wendigos by talking about them are only true if you use their names. Skinwalker and Windigo are not their names. Fairies. Folklore? Well, if we are talking about folklore, then flying saucers. The Nork, a nightmare creature with the precision of a fork, yet the sharpness of a knife. Other flat would tremble before the Nork. IDK, but I believe that sea serpents etc. really do exist, but are really rare, like 10 to 100 currently in the planet, and mostly come to the surface like once a decade. If you think of all the bizarre underwater creatures that lurk the earth, it is fair to theorize the possibility of such monsters. I don't know if I really believe they exist, but I do hold out hope that fairies/elves are real, the fair folk, seelie/unseelie fairies, etc. I have no basis for this, but I like to imagine that dragons were just a mistaken case of identity when some strange dinosaur skull or bones were unearthed way back when. My dad and I saw Bigfoot within 2 days of each other, same area and similar stories. Little pygmy people that live underground. I would think something like the Yeti is plausible, but I doubt that it's humanoid like it's described. I figure it's probably more like either a polar bear or some sort of primate that adapted to colder climates and higher altitudes. I figure that, since it lives in an area not really inhabited by humans, or even really visited by us with any frequency, it would be easier for it to go unnoticed. I'd like to think that a lot of things are real, but having looked into a lot of them, the more research I've done the harder it is to take most of it seriously. There's way too much personal bias, wishful thinking and flat out dishonesty that goes into a lot of the research done. That said, one thing, rather two things, that always stuck out to me were the basilisk and the Mongolian death worm. The death worm is a legless creature that lives in sandy deserts, has some kind of crest or antennae, and can apparently electrocute people. The basilisk is another legless creature that lives in sandy deserts, had a crest on its head, and was so venomous that, if a man on a horse speared one, the venom would travel up the spear and kill both him and his horse. Considering how good of a conductor sand is, and that multiple kinds of fish can generate electricity, it seems kind of plausible that some other animal might exist that has that kind of defense mechanism. In ancient Greek times, people weren't all that familiar with electricity and nobody had ever heard of an electric eel. So if somebody just dropped dead after spearing a weird snacky looking animal, an electric shock probably wouldn't have been the first explanation they thought of. Are we all just going to ignore that it says folklore in the title? Given how much of the ocean is unexplored, I fully believe in mermaids. I just don't think they are going to look like Ariel. Maybe something more fish-like Lagoon Boy from Young Justice. Drop bears. I'm Ojib. When people in the past faced starving times due to crop failure/drought, or tribal warfare etc., people who had no other choice would eat the dead out of absolute desperation. People would go mad from starvation before they finally did this. As you can imagine, it was deeply shameful for survivors. After the starving time, no one in the community wanted to discuss it, what they had to do to survive. For our people, the Windigo legend originated with these experiences. The Windigo was a euphemism, an actualization of the survivors' emotions during and after the starving time, wherein the urge to eat became all-consuming of a person's spirit, that the maddening hunger possessed them to such an extent that it would cause them to eat the community's dead, instead of discussing their actual feelings about the cannibalism that was caused by starvation. The story of the Windigo began. It continued to shape in retelling for centuries and centuries, since time immemorial between different Ojibwe communities. So picture the Windigo, a huge, towering spirit that walked the bush. Its power was so great that it knocked down trees as it moved. It came to life every winter, especially after drought, when the people could not store enough food in spring, summer and fall for winter, when the community's crops had failed, when the forest had been dry as tinder, and no berries and roots could grow, when the fishing had been poor because the fish were not running in the streams, when the hunting was poor because animals starved, because animal mothers could not eat enough, and they did not produce milk for their babies and the babies died, and the mothers starved, when even the beavers the land left, because the streams dried up, and because the birch trees withered. That was when the Windigo came to the land to torment the people. It followed them through the bush as they searched for food, until they could go no further. The Windigo then ran down the people, possessed the people, made them mad with hunger and lust for food of any kind, made them so evil and mad that they would eat the dead, the elders, the children. And if the Windigo entered you, you also became a Windigo. You could then possess others to become eaters of the dead as well. Gremlins, I seen one on the airplane wing. Informed and rational voters. Somewhere, I hope. The one I want to exist is the Windigo. Ghosts have to be something. I like two theories. Either the eternalism theory, that time is happening all at the same time, but we move through it. So like film and a camera and our consciousness is the light, yet sometimes we pick up parts of what we see as the past and future. So we see ghosts. Or UFOs are future flying crafts we can see when future crosses over. Or that we do all have the ability to hallucinate at random and even share the same hallucinations. It's something that can be controlled, which is what shamans can train themselves to do. Or it's a mental health issue when it's uncontrolled and controls you. Leviathan. Look, an impossibly huge sea creature. It must be supernatural. Or a whale. Old Greg. Voodoo zombification. While as a man of seen sea I do understand it would impossible for dead tissue to generate ATP and reanimate a corpse, I do believe somebody successfully brewed a concoction to damage neural functions enough to turn a person into a mindless slave, immune to pain, but retaining enough strength to be a threat. Alaskan bullworm. John A. Keel's ultra-terrestrials, entities capable of assuming different forms. From folklore, ghosts, vampires, brownies, to cryptozoologicals, Jersey Devil, Mothman, Bigfoot, to UFO encounters of all times. He talked about some creature that lives here on the planet alongside us, knows our fears and dreams, and is able to interact with us through those. This idea is reiterated in many of his books, though he never constructs a whole belief system on it, which is admirable. Just an interesting theory. I could easily believe that the beast of Bodmin was real at some point, most likely an escaped illegal exotic pet that escaped its aristocratic owner's estate and roamed around the moors until it eventually died. The chances of it still being alive are pretty minimal, if it did exist, though. I really want the world serpent and Orc Thulu to be a real thing. The mighty Esquilax, the horse with the head of a rabbit and the body of a rabbit. Some type of Windigo creature that lives deep in the woods. Their legend indicates that they can change their voice and or appearance. So, I think there is a possibility that they may exist, as terrifying as that might be. The Golem Beast. How do I know that it exists? I've seen it. Most of them, particularly the unseelie. I think they all exist. I just think whoever saw them was exaggerating or misremembering, or was just so scared they didn't get a good look. Me and my cousins once went camping out on a creek way out in the woods near my parents' house. My dad, without us knowing, put a deer camera in the woods a ways off from where our tent would be. We ended up being a little out of frame, but close enough so that he could see any shenanigans we pulled. Anyway, that night I saw a monster creep through the woods. It was giant and had a long creepy tail, big teeth, no feet. I panicked and ran a couple miles back to the house. My dad is skeptical, but tells me that he had a deer camera watching us. We go to grab the camera and watch the shots from around the time, since luckily the camera was right on that same ledge. Possum. One little possum. I was looking at a possum and convinced myself, as I looked at it, that it was at least 5 feet tall and didn't have feet. Possum. The cockamouse. The fairies that use corgis as mounts. Ents. Somewhere out there's a tree talking and Nobard is listening. Krampus.